Shaft Sinkhole Tragedy. It was May 28, 1973, and a group of 9 diving experts had planned a dive at Mount Gambier's Shaft Sinkhole. This sinkhole had a unique feature there, was only a tiny opening leading to a cave with a lake 20 feet below. From this opening, a beam of light went down into the cave and onto the lake, which was extremely helpful for the diver's orientation. This beam was visible throughout most of the cave, unless divers ventured too deep into one of the 2 side branches. Everyone initially agreed that they would stay within a 200 feet maximum depth range so they could remain in the main chamber and still see the guiding light. This was their only plan. On the second day, however, 4 divers planned to go to the western section of the cave, aiming for a depth of 250 feet, which would have been a new record. This was deeper than initially intended and posed a significant risk because in 1973 divers were still using regular air cylinders rather than mixed gas tanks. For this reason, they had to be more cautious as they went downwards because nitrogen narcosis might have settled in. As they went down, the increasing pressure would have pushed the nitrogen into the bloodstream, producing a state of consciousness that is similar to when people are drunk. Keep in mind that these divers were not very experienced in sea diving. They were more accustomed to standard open water, scuba diving. This added even more risk to their plan. They started going downwards into the western section of the cave, and one experienced diver noticed that nitrogen narcosis was kicking in, so he immediately went back out. Several of them followed him and went back to the surface as well. But 4 of them kept going, determined to set the record and get a quick look before resurfacing. After a minute or so, the group at the surface became concerned, realizing the 4 divers would soon exhaust their air supply. A few returned to the cave to find them, and they discovered a flashlight and a camera on the bottom, but no trace of the divers. There was a problem that we haven't yet mentioned. Silt. The movements of the 4 divers stirred up the long settled silt into a sand cloud that would take a lot of time to settle back. This reduced visibility to less than an arm's length, removing any hope for orientation for the underwater divers without being able to see anything. Oxygen running dangerously low and nitrogen narcosis kicking in. The 4 divers drowned. Cenote Temple of Doom Cave Incident. On August 17, 1997, 28-year-old Eduardo Mendez prepared for a diving trip in Mexico with 5 tourists, 3 Americans and 2 Canadians. Eduardo had been working as an open-water diving instructor for 3 years. By early afternoon, the group arrived at Cenote Temple of Doom, a small dark hole in the jungle floor about 10 feet across. A wooden ladder descended 16 feet to the water's surface. Among the group was 34-year-old nurse Rebecca Williams and her husband, Mark, 42-year-old software engineer Thomas Chen, and his 30-year-old wife, Lisa, and 28-year-old teacher Joy Johnson, who decided to sit out the dive because she was tired. The divers were equipped with single air tanks, minimal lighting, and no specialized cave diving gear. Eduardo's pre-dive briefing focused on the beauty of the location, but gave little attention to the potential dangers. One by one, they entered the water. The cenote's surface was small, encircled by limestone walls. Sunlight barely penetrated the water, casting a dim, mysterious glow. At a depth of about 33 feet, they passed through a halocline, the point where fresh water meets salt water. Beyond it, the cavern widened into a large chamber. For 20 minutes, the group explored the cavern zone, staying within sight of natural light. Then, Eduardo made a fateful decision. Instead of remaining in the safe area, he led them toward the Madonna Passage. 2 warning signs marked the transition from the cavern to the true cave zone. The first depicted a diver with a red slash through it. The second read, "Stop, prevent your death, go no further." Eduardo swam past the warnings without hesitation, and his clients, trusting his judgment, followed. The Madonna Passage narrowed to about 5 feet wide and 6.5 feet high. As they advanced, all daylight disappeared. After about 10 minutes, they were 394 feet from the entrance, and their air supplies were running low due to the depth, effort, and growing anxiety. Thomas Chen was the first to signal he was low on air. Realizing the danger, Eduardo signaled for everyone to turn back. In the tight confines of the passage, turning around caused confusion. Their movements stirred up silt from the cave floor, clouding the water and reducing visibility to almost nothing. Eduardo swam toward the exit, believing the others were behind him. In the chaos, Rebecca and Mark Williams became separated, while Thomas and Lisa Chen stuck together but drifted off in another direction. When Eduardo reached the cavern zone, he was shocked to find himself alone. His tank was nearly empty. He surfaced and quickly explained the situation to Joy. Swapping his nearly depleted tank for her full one, Eduardo dove back down without waiting for outside help. About 295 feet inside, he found Lisa Chen with her regulator out of her mouth. Thomas's air gauge was almost at zero. Eduardo immediately shared his air with Lisa and guided both of them towards safety, with Thomas following. Once they reached the cavern zone, he sent the Chens to the surface and turned back to search for the Williamses. 50 feet into the passage, he found Rebecca Williams unconscious with an empty tank. He pulled her to the surface, then went back down again and found Mark Williams, floating motionless with no air left. There was nothing he could do for him. Emergency services arrived, and Rebecca was rushed to the hospital, but despite medical treatment, she died later that evening from drowning and oxygen deprivation. Culverson Creek Cave Incident. On November 28, 1985, 7 friends who loved exploring caves went to Culverson Creek Cave in West Virginia. There had been a lot of rain recently, which caused flooding in the area. When they entered the cave, they found a passage that was 5 to 8 feet wide. A shallow stream flowed quickly over loose rocks on the cave floor. The group walked forward, not knowing what was about to happen. Only about 50 feet into the cave, they came to a huge boulder, a 5 feet tall rock that was blocking part of the passage. The group had 2 ways to get past it: climb over the boulder or squeeze through a narrow gap between the rock and the cave floor where the stream was flowing. 3 cavers went through the tight space safely without any problems. Eric Slagle, who was 26 years old and had lots of caving experience, led the next group of 3 people. He chose to go through the left side, stepping carefully as he walked through the stream. Just as he reached the middle of the boulder, something terrible happened. Suddenly, the massive boulder shifted and began to tilt to the left. The rock became unstable and started to fall. The other cavers tried quickly to stop it from moving, but they couldn't. The huge boulder crashed down, trapping Eric between the cave wall and the rock. Eric was stuck completely. His left temple and shoulder were pressed against the cave wall, and his right cheek was trapped against the boulder. His body couldn't move at all. The weight of the rock pressed hard against his chest, making it very difficult for him to breathe. Eric's friends were shocked and scared. They could see the pain in his eyes and watched as he got weaker. The feeling of not being able to help was terrible for them. One person ran out of the cave to get help while the other stayed and desperately tried to move the boulder. They pushed with all their strength, trying as hard as they could, but it didn't work. The rock was too heavy. They tried to use crowbars to move the rock, pulling with every bit of strength they had, but nothing worked. While they tried, they watched Eric's breathing get weaker and weaker. Eric stayed awake for about 3 minutes after the boulder fell. Soon, his body stopped moving. A small amount of blood came from his nose, and his pulse was getting weaker. One of the cavers tried to hold him up, hoping to take some pressure off him, but it didn't help much. At 4:20 a.m. in the afternoon, nearly an hour after the accident, they finally had a hydraulic jack. With a team of rescuers, crowbars, and the jack, they managed to move the boulder just enough to free Eric's body. His friends carried him to a drier part of the cave, just 20 feet away, and immediately started CPR. With every chest compression and every breath they tried to give him, they hoped they could bring him back. But Eric wasn't responding. His skin had turned pale, and although his body was still warm, his life was slipping away. At 5:25 a.m. in the evening, Eric was finally carried out of the cave on a stretcher. He was rushed to the hospital. Despite everyone's best efforts, it was too late. Eric Slagle died from his injuries.